All right. To respect everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate you all being here. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah. I am the Executive Director of PARC. Uh, we are here today for our third annual Parkinson's Educational Day, and that's brought to you by PARC, APDA, and University of Virginia's Neurology Department. As you all walked through, you saw that we have some sponsors today. So I want to go ahead and introduce our sponsors. We have Jack Anderson. Wow, Jack Anderson from Amneal. We have Omari Peeler from AbbVie. Kate Campbell from Medtronic. Trey Smith from Boston Scientific. Bryn Jones from Supernus. And we also have Ecom from UVA's, she's a PhD candidate. Yes, she is actually doing a trial for tremors. So she has information out there if you guys are interested in becoming a participant for her trial, okay? She is in the back corner back there. Please, during our breaks, go talk to them, thank them for their generous sponsorship. Other than that, I also want to thank Lauren and Brent from Hillsdale Conference Center. I don't think they came in. And also for all of our volunteers as well who are here, who came here yesterday and were here this morning setting up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The agenda, you all got copies of the agenda. We're going to stick to that as best as we can. Obviously, sometimes we run over a little bit, and that's totally okay. Again, our sponsors, you will also see that on your table as well. Additional tables, APDA has a table out there. Joel, I forgot, Joel is here. He also is going to be a presenter too. So guidelines for the day. After each presentation, we are going to have some question and answer time. So please keep questions until the end of the presentation. If you're on Zoom, we're going to have somebody hopefully checking questions. Please respect all questions that are asked and how they are answered. We will have one 15-minute break throughout the morning, but feel free to leave as you need to and exit and enter through the back door so there's not too much commotion up front. At your table, there's also a survey if you want to fill that out at the end of the session. If you're here for both sessions, feel free to fill that out at the end of the day. All right, so let's get laughing a little bit. For those who are PARC members, you guys know this. If not, please join along. I want you to say every line that is on the board out loud. I think you guys can go a little louder. Did anybody curse? Oh, you guys did really well on that one. All right. If you guys don't want to stand out there, you don't have to anymore. Appreciate you. All right. So as I said before, I'm the executive director of PARC, where we focus on exercise support, education, and socialization. We offer all these activities: yoga, rock steady boxing, support groups, quarterly topic-based speakers, educational events, and social activities. Our yoga sessions are an hour long. They're twice a week, and we offer them to both those with Parkinson's as well as caregivers. We have it's seated, standing, and there's ground exercises, and the instructors modify for all injuries. Nancy, who is actually volunteering today, is one of our yoga instructors. And we also have a couple people who are in attendance today who join our yoga sessions. Rock steady boxing, that is our most popular activity that we offer. It's 1 hour long sessions. They're non-contact boxing, but it's not just boxing. We offer classes Monday through Saturday, levels 1, level 2, level 3, 4, and those with cognitive decline. And we have 4 certified coaches. Like I said, we not only focus just on boxing, but we also do strength, coordination, cognition, balance, core, and flexibility. And we also like to have fun. So we'll put out some brain games, some reflex activities, a bunch of different stuff. The reason why we box, everything on the left side of your screen are Parkinson's symptoms, things that you may deal with, and then why we box and how we can help alleviate some of those symptoms for you. Our support groups, we actually just started a couple months ago an early onset support group that meets at the, oh, I didn't realize that picture was so bad. Early onset, so that's the second Wednesdays of the month. We offer it hybrid from 6 to 7. Then we have our other support group, which is on the third Tuesday of the month. We offer that in person from 4:45 to 5:45 and from 6 to 7 on Zoom. We also offer quarterly topic-based speakers. So we've had speech and language pathologists come in. We've had a nutritionist. We've had CPR training from UVA, a mental health seminar. And on May 19th, we're actually going to have someone, Doris Gelman, talk about elder law, estate planning, all those things that you may be thinking about. Our educational event, you can see that in 2024, we did our first educational event. We actually did that at UVA. We had about 65 people. 2025, we had 100 plus people in attendance. And then in 2026, over our 2 sessions, we have about 100 people separated into 2 sessions. So as you can see, we are growing. We also offer our social activities. These were bingo, bowling, potlucks. We had a baseball game. We just did sunpin bowling a couple weeks ago. These are some testimonials from a couple of our boxers. If you're not involved, just holler at me and we'll get you involved. It's a lot of fun. We're located across from Lowe's and across from Chick-fil-A in the same building of US Cellular and Play It Again Sports. For those with little grandkids or kids, we're on the main floor below Charlottesville Ballet. To get involved, you reach out to me, you fill out the intake forms, and you get a medical release form. If you're through UVA, all you have to do is send them a message on my chart, and then the nurse coordinator will usually get back to me within a week or so. All right, so that's my spiel. I'll be in and out all day, coordinating everything, but from here on out, Joel is going to take over and talk about APDA.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. It's lovely to see everyone here today. I'm happy to speak on behalf of the APDA Virginia chapter. My name is Joel Frondelli. By day, I am a behavioral therapist, and by night, I chair the board for the APDA Virginia chapter. It's our mission here in Virginia to be the statewide resource, to be the one-stop shop for all things Parkinson's disease. And I'm here to share a little bit about our story and what we are here to do for you here as Virginia residents. First, a little bit about our story. The APDA Virginia chapter began in 2 ways. First, as the Richmond chapter, and then in Virginia Beach. As it evolved, it grew into the larger Hampton Roads area, and then in 2022, it became officially the statewide Virginia resource. It has been quite the responsibility and a privilege to serve all of those, from the beach to the Appalachian Mountains, up into Northern Virginia and down and towards Chase City. Yes, I can. One thing that we do here at the APDA is connect you with resources far and wide. Some of you are here in Charlottesville. It's a wonderful place to live, especially with the hospital and UVA here present. APDA connects people from the rural areas of Virginia and matches them with local providers who can help them. Not a lot of movement specialists are everywhere, and it's hard to find them. It's few and far between. We connect people with support groups. We ignite support groups, and we will also support you in forging your own support groups. We will dedicate education and resources, our time, and connect you with the relevant professionals to support you and your community. We have a Rolodex of free publications to your benefit. These things range from medications to think about, to how to be a good care partner, to how to address the love of your relationship with your partner with Parkinson's disease. We also have a financial hardship program, and this is here to help you cover expenses that you might endure in your experience, transportation, adaptive equipment, respite care, etc. Some of our statewide support groups you can see here. There is a recurring weekly support group that is attended virtually every Wednesday, 10 to 11 a.m. You can get to know that through our staff member, Naomi. Her email is displayed up above, and you can also find me at the table, and I can get you that information as well. And a newly diagnosed support group, which is on the fourth Thursday of the month from 5:30 to 6:30. Some of our programs that we offer here at the APDA are a Good Start program and our PRESS program. These are designed to set a roadmap, to set you up in an understanding of what to expect, how your care partner is there to support you, and to give your mind some ease as you transition into a new kind of life. We have all kinds of online educational presentations and webinars that tap into every field of expertise that we have available to us here in Virginia. Neurologists, movement specialists, social workers, yoga instructors, painters, crafts persons. And we too put on our own education days, and we support all of the education days that go on here in Virginia. We like to show up, we support, we bring our materials. One of our big resources that the APDA has here in Virginia is the Virginia Parkinson's Conference. This has been hosted the past few years in Williamsburg, Virginia, at the College of William and Mary. It is at this event that we pull from our leading statewide resources, physicians, other sorts of providers to come and talk to you and be there in your community. We also have a growing sub-Parkinson's disease conference that occurs out in Roanoke to service those out in the mountains in our western part of our state. Some of our national education is put on by our leading doctor, Dr. Rebecca Gilbert. And right now she is putting on a pre-motor Parkinson's disease webinar. I highly encourage everyone to look into that, tap into that. It is quite enriching in itself. On our website, you will be able to also see the other virtual classes we offer here. It may be hard to see, so I will read them. There are dancing for Parkinson's disease, chair fitness, virtual Tai Chi, singing loud with Parkinson's disease. Like I said, Dr. Gilbert's pre-motor Parkinson's disease webinar, and virtual yoga. Like one of the people here, we are invested deeply into the research of Parkinson's disease. Since 1961, there have been a growing $68 million dedicated towards research that's been funneled through the APDA, through our communities, through grants, federal funding, etc. And we proudly promote and empower clinicians and scientific process projects that focus on the discovery of the causes and the finding of a cure for Parkinson's disease. Such grants include Diversity in Parkinson's Disease Research Grant. This addresses health inequities or differences among understudied Parkinson's disease communities, ethnicities, ancestry, geography, socioeconomic conditions, and gender. Another research grant will encompass relevant to the problems of Parkinson's disease, the causes, prevention, diagnosing procedures, the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and other neurological movement disorders. For local research, Virginia healthcare professionals and other researchers with credible IRB studies can reach out to us to help their recruitment process. You can tap into our network. We are the statewide, and so if there's professionals looking for those kinds of research individuals, please come to me and I'll connect you with the relevant people. In a new wave of APDA, we have a advocacy branch. This has always been our MO, but now it's become more and more ingrained in our day-to-day practice. We have a practicing chief public policy officer, and for us it is the vice president of the federal relations, but they sit on Capitol Hill. They're there all the time, advocating for you, and they will be available to you since it is in our proximity. DC is pretty close to Virginia, and they are available to you to ask questions about, to submit your concerns to. Some of the things on Capitol Hill that are being discussed currently are herbicides, paraquat being one of them. Syngenta, one of the largest manufacturers of paraquat, announced that it will stop producing it in 2026, this year. This is wonderful, as this is a step forward. Although it still remains legal and in use in the United States, it is a step in the right direction. Another event happening on Capitol Hill is the Bipartisan Healthy Brains Act. This major new federal bill represents a significant federal investment and would establish research centers focused on toxic exposures and brain health. The legislation is a critical step towards safeguarding millions of Americans, millions of Virginians living with neurodegenerative diseases today, and protecting future generations from preventable and obvious risk. Another event happening on Capitol Hill is the Veterans with Parkinson's. Your voice is needed. The Department of Veteran Affairs is reviewing whether additional toxic exposure should qualify for presumptive service connections for Parkinson's disease, which, in so many words, could reduce the burden of proof for veterans when submitting applications, speed disability compensations and access, expand Virginia VA healthcare eligibility, and improve quality of life for veterans with Parkinson's disease. There are many ways to get involved with the APDA. Attending events like this is one of them. Connect with me, connect with Naomi or Kathy here in this picture. Catherine is the chapter coordinator of the APDA, and her accompaniment, Naomi, not pictured here, is the programs director, which is in charge of the education days and all the other kinds of resource here. Become a volunteer. If you have any questions, please see me. You are looking to get involved. This is some of us in action. I guess it's just me. But this is a testament to our optimism walk. These happen all across Virginia. Right now, there will be one in Norfolk and another one in Virginia Beach and in Portsmouth. and they happen all across the world. There are smaller ones that happen in Fredericksburg and in Roanoke, and these are put on by local community leaders, often support group heads. Thank you for your time, and I hope this day unfolds so much fruit for all of you. If you have any questions, now is the time. And if you generate a question later on, I will be here. So find me. I'm a small man, so I'll raise my hand if you need. But thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Any questions? Any questions? All right. Yes.
Yes. So the APDA is situated to support you financially in that capacity, and will help you navigate the VA red tape. Like I said, what's going on in Capitol Hill will hopefully, and is looking to alleviate that burden of proof for veterans. So when they're going to their doctors at the VA, or if they're going to their own healthcare provider, they can reference the efforts that the APDA is doing on Capitol Hill, and it'll help expedite some of those moments you might undertake. But to what it would look like practically will be like a case-to-case basis. So if you would like to know a little bit more, I'm more than happy to speak with you. But in a large scope, it'll be through financial help and the obvious advocacy that we're doing on Capitol Hill, which you can reference in your applications. We had one more question.
Just to go back to the VA process, the case managers or the social workers at the VA are usually the first point of contact to help establish service connection. So, and then looping the APDA early on is important as well, because there's a lot of paperwork burden and evidence that's required. But the case managers and social workers are very helpful navigating that process on behalf of the VA.
Another question?
Oh.
Oh. Yes, we have some newly diagnosed pathways. We have a Parkinson's disease handbook. We have some other medical literature. So please stop at the table and review it, take it home. You may do with it as you please. These are resources for you.
All right, let's give Joel a round of applause. I also want you guys to know that we have Dr. Fergari and Dr. Shaw here as well from UVA. Yeah. Our next presenter is going to be Dylan Gonzalez. He is a movement disorders fellow at UVA. So let's give him a round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm very pleased to join you all for this talk today. I'll be talking about some early management in Parkinson's disease. So a little bit of history about Parkinson's disease. It was first described by James Parkinson in his essay on the shaking palsy. Later, Ehringer and Hornikevich noticed that there was a decreased dopamine in the Parkinson's disease brain. Hornikevich and Berkmeyer first developed an intravenous dopamine therapy in 1961, followed by the oral levodopa therapy that is kind of the mainstay of our treatment at this time. So when I talk to people who are early in their Parkinson's disease, I typically do recommend levodopa as an initial therapy. Now, there have been a lot of, fluctuations in how people have thought about levodopa and have thought about this therapy. There have been thoughts that levodopa could be toxic to the brain, that delaying taking levodopa could benefit you in the long run, that the levodopa itself will lose effectiveness over time, and that it also can cause dyskinesia. So I wanted to talk about some of these common misconceptions about levodopa to start with. So is it toxic to the brain? So we find that the longevity of patients with Parkinson's disease that take levodopa has been substantially increased compared to those who abstain from this therapy. While disability scores and dementia risks, do progress as time goes on, it's more related to the duration of the Parkinsonism and Parkinson's disease rather than the duration of levodopa treatment. So it's more related, just how long we've had Parkinson's and not so much to the quantity of levodopa that we have tried. They have done, postmortem autopsy and found that the area of the brain, the substantia nigra, this is the area that produces dopamine, and that we see brain cell loss in this area in Parkinson's. The cells are not changed with the use of levodopa compared to a healthy cohort. And they showed that because they had a long-term study of patients that did not have Parkinson's disease. They took high doses of levodopa, and at that investigation, they showed that their brains were still healthy from taking this medication. They did not show signs of toxicity or atrophy of the brain or any greater brain cell death than a normal person who is not taking this. Some people have said that, delaying the start of levodopa could be beneficial. Here we see a graph showing symptom burden in Parkinson's disease and how it's ameliorated with levodopa. Let's see if there's so the top graph, it shows a early start of the levodopa. So the light gray, we have the levodopa started, and it shows that there's an initial response and some mild benefit. Now, in the middle bar here, we have somebody starting a dopamine agonist is another type of medication. This is like a pramipexole or a MAO-B inhibitor like rasagiline or selegiline. So they both do get an initial response and some benefit with this medication. But we see as we increase our levodopa to, kind of our optimum dosing, that we get a full on response. So this is when our on time is when the tremors and rigidity, bradykinesia are much improved. That kind of the Parkinson's disease falls into the background for your day-to-day life. So we're still able to do the things that we want to do. And we see that in the dopamine agonists and MAO-B group, that this kind of full on is not ever achieved until levodopa is added as an adjunct therapy. And then down at the bottom, we have a treatment delay strategy. This is where we don't take any medication, and we see that they have not gotten any benefit from any therapy, even a small benefit from a dopamine agonist or MAO-B inhibitor, until they do start that levodopa. Now, as we progress in time, so around the 2 to 4, years of Parkinson's symptoms, that there is some beginning of a wearing off phenomenon that's noticed. And that's kind of our dark gray. And then the darkest gray is going to be a peak dose dyskinesia. So this is kind of the wiggly movements that can occur as the brain can not control our dopamine so much. I think the most important part of this is the encircled red portion on the right. So that shows the cumulative disability over time. So the cumulative disability is going to be much, much less in the early levodopa strategy, and then 2-3 times higher in these other levodopa sparing and delayed treatment strategies. So our goal is to provide the most benefit for the longest period of time. And we have found that an early levodopa strategy is going to provide the largest benefit even for the longest time. And we can see here at the end that kind of all of the groups do come together and they all have eventually started the levodopa. Now, what causes this loss of benefit of levodopa? So early on in mild and into early moderate stages of Parkinson's, while the substantia nigra is not able to produce dopamine, the other brain cells that do use it in the basal ganglia are able to store that dopamine and release it as needed. And there's not too much of it just kind of floating around and maybe causing some more issues. So this is kind of a day-to-day, we take the levodopa in the morning and we see that so you take it right here and the blood level of the levodopa goes up, and then as that dose wears off, it comes back down. Now, of course, in practice, we don't want you to come all the way down. We'd have you take another dose, somewhere around here to keep you into this area. But early on, we stay in this nice therapeutic on window. And we are not experiencing off time or dyskinesia. But as time goes on, our brain is less able to store the levodopa or the dopamine, and we get some extra side effects or loss of effect. So we take the dose and we may experience some dyskinesia at the peak of it in our blood level, and then as it wears off, there's not enough of it, just because our brain cannot store the dopamine and appropriately use it. So this is kind of the natural progression of the brain's ability to hold and store this dopamine. So it's just really a natural progression that's not caused by excessive dopamine. It's just caused by the progression of Parkinson's and the loss of brain cells that use the dopamine. So this is another graph that shows how that is displayed too. So here in early Parkinson's disease, we take the levodopa and it never gets to a hyperkinetic or dyskinetic effect, and it has a long duration of a motor response and very little dyskinesia. Now, as we get into a moderate Parkinson's disease, it's a shorter duration motor response. We're having to take the levodopa more frequently throughout the day to avoid the off phenomenon, and there may also be some dyskinesia as well. Now, as we get into advanced PD, the level of dyskinesia is often anticipated to increase. The doses, the brain cells cannot store the dopamine, so it's kind of floating around and being and activating some of the neurons too much, and that's causing the dyskinesia. So we're going kind of through our good on time, and then we have on with dyskinesia. So you're still not having the bradykinesia or rigidity, stiffness, and tremor, but you are having these extra wiggly movements that can be, make tasks difficult in other ways besides tremor, and can also be, dangerous if you have it in your legs, and can cause difficulty walking, and, has kind of its own flavor of difficulty. So anybody still want to wait to start levodopa? So this is another study that compared an Italian cohort with a Ghanaian cohort of people with Parkinson's disease. So they chose these two groups because, in kind of the Western world, everybody or most everybody is able to start levodopa, but in these, in unfortunately less developed countries, the opportunity to obtain this medicine is much more difficult. And it's kind of a look back in time to how Parkinson's disease was treated in the past. So we see that the very light blue is the time from the onset of symptoms to the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So that's not really seen in the Italian cohort, but in in Ghana, there's a large time even before diagnosis. Whereas here we have the time from diagnosis to starting the levodopa, and levodopa is started here. And so we have a very nice time on chronic levodopa without any motor complications. Now here in the Ghanaian group, now they're diagnosed here and they do not start levodopa until they've had symptoms for almost 6 years. And this on time without motor complications is very brief. There's even one of the patients in the Ghanaian cohort had dyskinesias on her very first dose of levodopa. So it's completely irrelevant to how long they had been on the therapy. They took one dose and immediately developed dyskinesias, unfortunately. Now, we do see that there is this period of, levodopa on time and some wearing off, which, as we have seen in the previous slides, is anticipated. It may look like there's a little bit more time with this in Italy, compared to the Ghanaian cohort, but these p-values here is part of the, research statistics that we use, and it shows that there's no statistical difference between these times. So kind of, think of them more as much more, basically the same as far as we can tell in this study. And they do develop dyskinesias in the end as well. So we and now this is a therapy matched group, trying to get a little bit more equivalent comparison between the groups. And we see that, even this good on time without motor complications is even larger. And this one is still, incredibly brief, unfortunately. And then again, these p-values show that there is no statistical difference in the amount of time the patients experience on levodopa with wearing off and on levodopa with dyskinesias. Finally, and perhaps, maybe the most important thing in early Parkinson's disease, and well, at any stage in Parkinson's disease, frankly, is exercise. So in this top graph, we have the lifelong exercise in blue and black. The blue cohort has Parkinson's disease. The black line, these are people without Parkinson's disease. And the green and the red are people who have Parkinson's disease but did not exercise in the prodromal phase of Parkinson's disease. So we see that the lifelong exercise, they have more dopaminergic neurons to start with, and then the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease start later than those who did not exercise in life. And they maintained a higher amount of dopaminergic neurons throughout their disease course. And in this second cohort, we have the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease here, indicated by this D, and one group started exercising, the green, and then the red group did not start any exercise. And we see that by starting to exercise, even after the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, we are able to preserve our dopaminergic neurons and prolong our life and avoid and delay some of our other symptoms. So again, we have now exercise is not only going to help with the motor symptoms, it helps also with the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which we're finding can be, very disabling as well. So the non-motor symptoms, we see, this is the clinical threshold of Parkinson's disease. So, the diagnosis for somebody not exercising may come a little earlier again. And then we can see that the non-motor symptoms are mitigated with exercise after diagnosis compared to the traditional PD course. And of course, the lifelong exercise is going to be, have the least amount of non-motor symptoms. And this is displayed again with even a greater amount of effect in the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So we see the, traditional PD course, the burden of motor symptoms accelerates much faster, but starting exercise after diagnosis is beneficial as well. And then, of course, the regular lifelong exercise has the most benefit. And then here we are again, the quality of life measure is here. So, as the disease progresses, we have decrease in our quality of life. But, if you do begin exercising after diagnosis, then we can maintain a good quality, a better quality of life than without exercise. Exercise has been shown to have primary, secondary, and tertiary benefit in Parkinson's disease. So what does that mean? So primary benefit means that it can prevent the development of Parkinson's disease in general. We want the primary prevention before it even starts. Secondary prevention means that the disease course can be modified with exercise. So you would have a slower disease course, and that's kind of demonstrated here in the dopaminergic neurons, that we're actually able to slow the progression of the brain cell loss. And then finally, we have the tertiary protection, which is going to be the symptomatic benefit that we get from exercise. So that is seen in our non-motor symptoms and motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Now, of course, everybody is different, and some people are able to tolerate levodopa, and other people have some difficulty. So of course there's going to be differences with everybody, and we do want you to be on kind of the maximal therapy, living your life to the fullest, doing everything that you want to do, especially in early Parkinson's disease, while you still have your good not good motor symptoms, low motor symptoms, low non-motor symptoms. So again, thank you all for having me here today. I've been very pleased to talk to you about this subject of early Parkinson's disease management. Please, is there any questions? Anybody? Yes, that's a great question. So resting tremor and dyskinesia, I kind of think of almost as opposite. So a tremor is going to be a rhythmic and kind of predictable movement that you get. And dyskinesia is going to be more of a writhing, unpredictable movement that can come over the whole body. So it's not going to have this kind of, predictability. And we see tremor as an off symptom. So if you were to avoid taking your levodopa, then you would have tremor. But if you maybe took too much, or, as the disease progresses, then you would have on time with dyskinesia. So the tremor is going to be more associated with rigidity and slowness of movement, whereas the dyskinesia is more associated with the on time. There will be less rigidity, bradykinesia, but you would have a larger amplitude of a less predictive movement that that likely would be in more of the body than just a resting tremor, which is typically just in, a hand. The dyskinesia can be over the whole body, can affect the spine, the legs, the head, the mouth, the face. So it can be much more widespread over the body. Yeah, so we have a resting tremor that's often seen with walking, like this. It goes away with action. And then kind of a dyskinesia will be these kind of wriggling movements, mouth opening, tongue dyskinesia can happen. It can be, writhing movements as well. So it's certainly, less predictable and encompassing more of the body, and it can occur in different places in different people too. So you may just have dyskinesias of the leg or the foot or the mouth or hand. There is some loss of course, Parkinson's disease has a lot of effect on what we call the autonomic nervous system. So this is our GI tract, the heart as well can see, they have scans that can show that we have dopamine loss in the heart. And blood pressure can be very affected, especially as Parkinson's disease progresses, and we have a lesser ability to maintain a steady blood pressure. And that is based on the heart and also the vasculature too.
I'm just kind of curious about the longevity of the development of Parkinson's. That when I look at your last slide up there, it looks like there's a consistency. And my understanding has always been that there really is no consistency. It can be progressive for every person in a much different way. Is that in a much different time? Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. So the progression of Parkinson's disease is, can be affected by many different things. It can be affected by, how you first develop Parkinson's disease, what sort of exposures you had. We heard about the paraquat, that could lead to maybe a more progressive course. Genetic courses have different courses as well. But you can, I think the point was that you can mitigate the acceleration of your symptoms with exercise, but certainly it is not a cookie cutter, and many people experience it differently and based on what age you develop it and, your level of physical fitness, when you do first notice symptoms. Excellent question. Thank you. Yes.
I was just curious, in the studies that you've been showing up there on the screen, and in particular the previous slide, I believe it had this study with the Italians and such. Yeah. Were there just male subjects? What role did gender play? And was it all just one gender in these studies, to your knowledge?
So this is a mixed gender cohort of people with Parkinson's disease. I do not know the exact breakdown of men versus women. I do know that especially in the Ghanaian cohort, there were more men than women sampled in this. But I believe in the Italian cohort, it was much more 50-50 split. But we do see similar progression and response to medication in men and women.
Always, the impact of exercise, and can you comment a little bit more on the intensity and frequency of exercise? Obviously, more is better, but obviously
Yes.
you need to do enough to make a difference. And I was wondering if you could provide some color to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so exercise, we typically want to recommend a moderate to vigorous exercise. Now, kind of what does that mean then? So I typically explain a moderate exercise is if you are able to sing while you are doing it, it's not moderate. So you need to be huffing and puffing. If you're finding that you can sing along to whatever music you're listening to, then that is not enough. So we really want you to be sweating and breathing heavily and get your heart pumping for the best benefit. The more vigorous exercise, the better. We have seen, that any level of exercise is beneficial. I like to recommend kind of a more exercise, 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous exercise. So that's going to be 30 minutes 5 times a week. Of moderate to vigorous intensity exercise. Aerobic and resistance training have not been shown to be different. I think that both of them are very important. In people as we age, the resistance training can be important for other things like osteoporosis and, just general getting around too. So I think just doing aerobic or just doing resistance training is you're kind of cutting yourself short and not getting all the benefits. That's why I love Rock Steady Boxing provides aerobic and resistance training. So getting a good mix of both of those, and now you could do, aerobics one day and resistance training the next day, and that's a great regimen as well. But, to prevent muscle loss and osteoporosis, I do like to recommend resistance training. Now that could be body weight training, just regular lifting weights at the gym, pumping iron, or, I guess that's kind of it, body weight or other weights. But lots of different exercises are beneficial. And then some other things that I like to recommend for flexibility and balance are things like Tai Chi, or there's another one, Qigong, Qigong, is a kind of a lower level of the Tai Chi that you can do easily at home. It doesn't require too much movement, and is a good beginner therapy to do. And there's plenty of videos on YouTube that I like.
Person I've been trying all my life to convince him to go dancing with me. Is there any scientific evidence of the effect of dancing?
Yeah, dancing is actually a very interesting form of exercise. I have seen studies that on mood and exercise, and it showed that any sort of exercise can improve mood and depression, but dancing was actually shown to have a much higher magnitude of benefit, and especially in mood and depressive symptoms, anxiety. So I think it's a fantastic aerobic exercise to do, and it can really help to alleviate anxiety and bring and strengthen interpersonal bonds and relationships, and in your community too. I mean, you see these groups do square dancing and things like that, and bringing the community together, and bringing joy. And that's another big thing, is that, I feel that dancing especially is very beneficial for the joyfulness, which I think is an incredibly important part of life, and something that we need to continue to focus on as Parkinson's develops, and maintaining that joy.
All right, Jean's going to be our last question for Dylan.
Does D3 help? I've heard that D3 brings that joy you talk about.
Vitamin D?
Yeah.
Yeah, vitamin D is very important. I haven't read studies regarding joy specifically in vitamin D. I know I feel better after laying out in the sun, which is, another way to get vitamin D. So, just being outside, people are kind of a lot like plants. We need water, we need sunlight. And it's a good way to, feel better and get some natural vitamin D as well. But for a lot of people who, are less mobile, I do highly recommend, supplementing with vitamin D as well if you're not able to get it naturally.
All right, let's give Dr. Gonzalez a round of applause. All right, I know that you guys are probably like, let's move. We have one more presentation before our break, so just hold off just a little bit. We have Lauren Miller here from UVA. She is the clinical research coordinator at UVA Neurology. So let's give her a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. Again, I'm the CRC at UVA. So these are our current research studies we have going on. There is one extra that Kim is going to come up later and give her presentation on as well, but I promise I will keep this brief so that you guys can get to your break. Up first is what we call our NEWLARC study. So this study is specifically looking at a drug called NEW411, which is a potent, selective, orally bioavailable, highly permeable, brain penetrating, small molecule inhibitor of LRRK2. All of those words basically mean that it is an inhibitor of the gene called LRRK2. And why do we care about LRRK2? It's because LRRK2 is one of the genes that is known to be involved in the development of Parkinson's disease. So in essence, this drug aims to decrease the production of this gene and hopefully slow or stop progression of the disease. If you want a little bit more information, there is an NCT number at the top of each of these slides. That will, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you can look up that number and it'll give you more information about the drug itself and the trial itself. So for the study, it is a 4 or 5 part study depending, but as all studies do, the first is always going to be a screening visit. This is to make sure, one, that you're consenting into the study, you agree with all of the things that are going to be happening and you do want to be in it. And then, of course, the screening visit is mostly to ensure that you qualify for the study. So there's a lot of questionnaires, physical neuro exams, just background information that we'll collect to make sure you're healthy and able to do the study itself. This study specifically involves a lot of scans. So you also have to pass an MRI, a chest CT, and a DAT scan. And if you guys are not familiar with the DAT scan, that one is used to look at dopamine in the brain. So it's used to help diagnose Parkinson's disease occasionally. The last part of the screening for this study is an optional lumbar puncture. Those are typical in most PD studies. They're always typically optional. So if you want to get a lumbar puncture, you're more than welcome to. Does not stop you from being in the study. Next, we have what's called a run-in period. So one of the main things that they are looking at in this study is a device that they give to each of the participants. In the device, it has daily assessments that you have to do. So things like tapping numbers in order as quickly as you can to test your reflexes, holding the phone in your hand to test for tremor on a daily basis. Also, you'll hold the phone and you'll walk to test your walking patterns. All of the assessments take about 5 to 10 minutes a day, but the run-in period is used basically to see, are you able to use the device? Are you having problems with the device? And kind of get you used to using it. After that, you would get put on the study drug or placebo. And this will be for 52 weeks. So you'll be on the study drug for a full year. You'll be doing those daily assessments every day, and it involves 15 in-person visits over the course of a year. At the end of that year, you have the option to just end the study and be done, or you have the option to continue on in what's called an open label extension, which means that everyone in the study, regardless on if you had placebo or not, gets to receive the study drug for an additional 28 weeks. So to know if you qualify for this study, these are some basic requirements to be in the study. This one is looking for people that are diagnosed with at least 6 months of Parkinson's cardinal symptoms. You have to be LRRK2 driven. Of course, most people do not know if they're LRRK2 driven or not. So you would do a cheek swab test that they would send to you, swab your cheek, send it in, and then they can tell you if you are LRRK2 driven PD or not. And then you cannot be on any dopaminergic therapy currently to treat Parkinson's disease. I do have this beautiful QR code. It unfortunately does not work. So don't worry about it. I have my contact information on the last slide. So if you guys have any questions or want to see if you're interested in any of the trials, the last slide has my email and my phone number, or come talk to me later today and we can talk about it. Okay, up next is the ANOVIS OLE trial. So again, OLE stands for open label extension. This trial is a open label extension of a trial that happened about 3 years ago now. And that trial was looking at a study drug called butanetap. So this one, if you want to read the full description of butanetap, it basically inhibits a bunch of different neurotoxic aggregating proteins. So basically by inhibiting the translation of these proteins, it helps reduce the level of the proteins in the brain. And then the aggregation of those proteins is thought to be one of the reasons that contributes to the progression of both Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So for this trial specifically, it's much easier than the last one. There's 2 main parts. Basically, you will screen in to the study. There's 2 separate ways you can do that, and I'll go over that next. And then after that, you are on the study drug. Everyone gets the study drug since it's an open label extension, and it involves 7 visits over the course of 36 months. So the purpose of this study specifically is not to test the study drug in different populations. It's to test the long-term effects of the study drug, which is why everyone gets to be on it. And it is almost 3 years of study visits. So for this one, it's a little bit more complicated for who can qualify for the study. Cohort 1 participants are those people that were in the last study, in the phase 3 trial that already happened. You will know if you are that person or not. The other option of getting into this study, which is very exciting, is they're looking specifically for people who have had DBS before. This is one of the first trials we've had at UVA that's looking specifically for people who have received DBS with a disease-modifying drug. So if you are interested and you have DBS, please feel free to reach out. The only major requirement is you had to have DBS at least a year ago, and it has to have documented clinical benefits for your Parkinson's disease. Up next is the study called Pariso. So this one is a phase 3 trial looking at the study drug Prazenizab. Whether that is the correct pronunciation of the drug or not, I am not sure, but that's what we're going with for today. So Prazenizab. This is an IgG1 monoclonal antibody that is directed against alpha-synuclein. So again, this is hopefully thought to reduce the accumulation of the alpha-synuclein in the brain, which again should help slow progression of the disease theoretically. So all 3 of the past trials have been disease-modifying trials, which is really exciting. It's not supposed to treat the symptoms, it's supposed to treat the disease itself. So for this one, again, screening is always going to happen. We're always going to make sure you understand the study and know what you're getting into before you start. All the basic screening requirements, so physical neuro exam, you'll do questionnaires, you'll do all sorts of brief tests that make sure that you, 1, qualify for the study, and 2, are safe to be in the study. And then this study also involves an MRI of the brain and the optional lumbar puncture. So once you get through screening and you qualify for being in the study, it is 29 visits over the course of 104 weeks. So this is a long study. You, of course, will be randomized. So you'll either be put on the study drug or placebo. And then at each of the assessments, you will receive the study drug. This drug is interesting because it's not a pill form, it is an infusion form. So you will get the infusion of the drug when you come in for the visits. There's no taking of drug at home. You get an MRI once a year. That's the only other big scan that you have to worry about. Besides that, it's mostly just questionnaires and assessments. And then at the end of this study, this one also has an open label extension. So it will be an additional 27 visits over the course of another 104 weeks. So basically, whether you get placebo or not, you'll get the study drug for at least 104 weeks. To qualify for this one, a little more specific in terms of who qualifies or not, but we're looking for people who have been diagnosed for at least 3 months, but no more than 3 years. And then you should be treated with a stable dose of levodopa up to 450 milligrams per day. If you're not sure if you qualify based off of those criteria, please reach out. We're happy to do the calculations for you and figure out if you do. The next study we have, this one is local to UVA, so it's being run by the ENT department at UVA. It is our olfactory study. So this study is specifically looking at determining basically normal fluctuations in olfactory thresholds in a diverse population. So the Parkinson's disease group population is cohort 3B of this study. So you guys would just be a very small population of people within the much larger study. But that one is looking specifically on quantifying longitudinal olfactory detection thresholds in people with Parkinson's disease. So it's 3 visits over the course of 1 year. Basically, you'd have your screening visit. They would screen you with a questionnaire, and then you would come in. There's 3 main tests you would do when you come in. All 3 are smell tests, which I don't think surprises anyone since it's an olfactory study. So it's a lot of just sniffing random pieces of paper to see if you can smell it or not. You'll do that on your first visit, then you'll be given tests to do at home. You'll do a bunch of tests for the first month, and then you come back in for your second visit. And then after that second visit, you're basically given a test to take once a month at home for the rest of the year until you come in for your final visit. So pretty safe, easy, not difficult compared to the other ones. To to qualify for this one, there's two main groups. You either need to have been diagnosed with Parkinson's up to 2 years or have been diagnosed with Parkinson's between 5 and 8 years. The only exclusionary criteria is basically any other injury to your nose that could affect your ability to smell. The last study I have for you guys is a study called Parkinson's. This is a device study for people with Parkinson's disease, specifically with people who have freezing of gait in Parkinson's disease. So the Parkinson's is a basically customizable device that will have multiple types of cues, and it will adapt the cues that work best for you. So it uses an algorithm that helps like predict when freezing of gait will happen. And then it also is used to determine which cues work best for you. And then we'll provide those cues to help you get over your freezing of gait. So looking at creating a scarf type of device would be for women that don't have glasses. So the purpose of this study is to test the safety and tolerability of this new device and test its effectiveness with stopping freezing of gait episodes. So there's 3 parts of this study. It is pretty simple. You come in for a screening visit, and we'll determine that you do have freezing of gait. And then basically, given the device, we should be able to use it. And then we walk you on a obstacle course, and we try and get you to freeze as much as possible so that the device can learn what causes you to freeze and determine what kind of cues work best for you. We will walk you through the assessment one more time with the device on, and it will try and stop your freezing of gait as much as possible. After the in-home visit, you're given the device, you take it home with you for 2 weeks. One of those weeks, you'll be using the device every day when you're awake. And then the other week, you will not wear the device. It's just to randomize you. You have the device at home, you have to do things like a question, like how much freezing you're experiencing, do you like the device, how does it work, all those fun things just to determine what needs to be changed with the device over time. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, you come back in, you return all of your questionnaires to us and the device, and then we give you an exit interview just so that you can give us honest feedback on the device and what you liked and didn't like. So 2 visits, and they're about 2 weeks apart. Again, the only thing you really need in order to qualify for this study is Parkinson's disease and experience freezing of gait episodes. The last requirement is just you need to be able to walk, because we need to be able to see you freezing and then hopefully not freezing with the device on. So of course, at UVA, we're constantly looking for more research studies. We are constantly getting more and more at our site. So if you're interested in receiving information about all of our upcoming trials as they, come out, you can sign up for our newsletter, which is also the email where we blast out information about research studies going on at UVA. So that email is right there for you guys. It's UVA movement disorders at uvahealth.org. And then last up, finally, this is my contact information. Again, the QR code does not work, but that is my email and phone number, and you can get in contact with me there. And of course, I should be here for most of the day today, so please feel free to stop me, ask me any questions about anything. And Kim is going to come up and talk about her study that's going on at UVA as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kim. I'm a PhD candidate in systems engineering here at UVA. Currently, we're looking at how people with tremor use touchscreen devices. It's a 1-visit study. You come in, tap and type on a tablet for about 2 hours, and that's it. So if you have any questions about the study at all, I'll be outside. Feel free to come by and ask me any questions. So yeah, thank you so much.
And again, if you are interested in her trial, feel free to contact me as well, and I can always pass your information on to her.
As a subject, do you get a going away gift like the results of the tests that you've taken, the MRI and the?
So it depends on the study itself and what they allow and what they don't allow. Of course, for any of the testing you do, including the MRI, the chest CTs, the lumbar punctures, if something is wrong, you will be notified immediately. We'll also contact your doctor so that, you know, it can be addressed. If everything looks normal, you most likely won't get those results unless you specifically ask for them. And again, it'll depend on what study it is and what they allow us to share with you. Did you? Oh.
Yeah, my understanding is that if you're doing a study here, as an example, you know, VCU wouldn't do the same one because the pharmaceutical companies kind of keep them geographically separated. Is there or why isn't there, you know, you having a list that would have the VCU or the other local ones that would be kind of collected together so that it would be, you know, something that, you know, Dr. Shah or whatever would have access to all of those and we would, that would be local?
So we are working on working closer with VCU on getting something like that set up. I am now in contact with the research coordinator. So anytime we have a study that's recruiting, we try and reach out to them so that they can share it with their group as long as it is not fighting with their study recruitment. So typically the reason why this isn't done is because we may be doing different studies, but we're recruiting the same patient population. And of course, we would like people to be in our study and not at the other study. But of course, there's always times where we have trials going on that we're looking for recruitment, and we'll reach out to VCU and they'll kind of reach out to their population group. So it works both ways. If they have anything, we try and share it as well, which is how we have the other email address.
And just to add a little bit to that, we do try to collaborate more with VCU. Definitely in the last few years, we've been working with their division chief, and we communicate. We're a part of the same list server for an email that joins all of the movement disorder people that are interested here in the state of Virginia. So we definitely know what they're doing. We get notifications so we can share also with our patients. And later today, we're going to have the research coordinator from VCU also giving us a talk about the studies that they're doing right now in their center. So yes, there's definitely more efforts to try to collaborate with them and work together that we can feed them with potential patients who have interest in their particular study in the same way that they can also send patients who are interested in the studies that we're running over here.
You guys are getting me to get my exercise today.
Just kind of curious, what the state of studies are now with Mr. Kennedy's cutback on everything.
As of right now, we have not had any studies impacted by the cuts in funding. That is more for like NIH funding. So there are much smaller studies that are being affected by the lack of funding. Our only study that actually uses NIH funding is that Parkinson's device study, and we received funding for it in full already, so it should not be impacted.
All right, let's give you two a round of applause.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So I'm Dana Morrissey. I work at the multidisciplinary clinic, Parkinson's clinic at UVA. Testing. Okay. So I work at the Comprehensive Parkinson's Clinic at UVA, and I do program development in the Huntington's disease clinic. So I sort of think for movement disorder families and patients, how can we provide more wraparound care to support you through your journey? So I thought I might be a good candidate to ask these gracious folks some questions about their experience. And I'm very grateful to be asked. I just want to do a thank you to Sarah and all the whole park team for putting this together. We are so thrilled to be partners with them. And also to Joel and Naomi from APDA and all of the sponsors here that came today. And thank you to you, panelists, who are going to bring their symbols to us today. So we're going to try to keep answers brief just so we can make sure to get a good mix of responses on all the different questions. But if you want to go deeper in anything, please feel free to raise your hand and you will, I'm sure you're going to be very polite and not interrupt each other and let before we get into questions. Could you all just say a little brief thing about what unexpected thing you have learned since your or your partner's diagnosis? And introduce yourself as you're saying that so everyone knows who's who.
I guess I read this question and thought, oh, it's so much to take in. I think I've also tried very hard to respect Tom, my partner's decisions about his own life. I think that's the most important thing to learn. Not to be naggy, not to just try to be there for support, not anything else.
Okay, thank you. And you're Martha, right?
The stone.
Martha, and your partner is Tom.
My partner is Tom, who's somehow taking a picture of me. Stop.
Okay, Carolyn, share with us.
My name is Carolyn Shears, and I have been living with Parkinson's for the past 10 years or so. And I think the most unexpected thing was people's reaction to my coming out about Parkinson's. So some of my friends, they don't really know what to do with that information. And so it's kind of awkward. And then some people just would really rather not have to hear about it. And so that was kind of unexpected. I feel I fall into the category of somebody who's feeling like it's almost better off not to discuss it with people who aren't part of my community. That's my answer.
Yeah, my name is Jim. I was just diagnosed with Parkinsonism, potentially Parkinson's disease. Maybe it's something else. We'll get into that a little bit later. But just past November, what's the one unexpected thing I've learned about myself since the diagnosis? Well, how to deal with deep uncertainty and how to process that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's really a journey that's you're not expecting, and you have to live with it and have to do your best. And that's the one thing I'm looking through right now.
Thank you all very much. I think I'm going to stick with that uncertainty theme, if that's okay with you all, and just ask about, as you look back on getting your diagnosis, I've heard a lot of people say that the uncertainty either of the diagnosis itself, not having any surety around what it actually is, or the uncertainty around what your course might look like. What was something that helped you handle that after receiving your diagnosis?
Go ahead.
So the question is, what has helped me after receiving the diagnosis? I have to say I'm a really big fan of YouTube, and I'm just so thankful. I think most of us are in this room were around before the internet came out, and be able to get a lot of information. You have to sift through it. There's a lot of garbage, there's a lot of noise, but there's also a lot of very good information out there from credible sources. We'll go through who I sort of know and trust in a few minutes, but I think I find comfort in getting factual knowledge under my hat and being able to figure things out to help explain things. And the more knowledge I have, the better off I am through managing this.
Just a quick follow-up. So are you looking at videos and content around people sharing their own experiences? Or are you looking at information that's coming from healthcare providers and researchers around the thing? Okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of garbage out there, so you have to be very careful about what you look at online. But to ignore anything online or to put your head in the sand as well is, I think, in this day and age, is just not doing yourself any favors at all. So I think you need to, you know, some of the places online that I know and trust would be something like anything put out by the Davis Finney Foundation. I think is very, very good stuff, very powerful, very facts-based. You want to sort of get away from the emotional roller coaster and there's a lot of what is me and poor me stuff out there, and I try to stay away from that and maintain a positive mental attitude towards the whole thing, because living through the uncertainty of whatever we are suffering through, and each person's different. You just want to be able to, for me at least, what works for me is just having more knowledge, and I've got a whole backlog of stuff that I need to read, but I don't go on why this happened to me. I can't change that. What I can do is manage today, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else have a?
I was just going to say that it's so important to have a positive mindset. And so mindset really does matter as you take a look at this notion of living with Parkinson's. You're not dying from Parkinson's. You're actually figuring out how to live your best life with Parkinson's. And so the positive mindset means it's, you know, you've got to have it. So finding my community of people, JoJo McDuffie was one of the first folks I was introduced to as it relates to being a coach or coaching me. And JoJo just had a really great mindset about it and challenged me to believe that I was stronger than I thought that I was. And he just helped me bust through that wall. And so I appreciate JoJo immensely for that. And the importance of, I'm back to this community. One of the best things about Park is the community of people that I surround myself with is really, really important to me. And so we kind of urge each other along, and it's beneficial.
Do you feel like that exposure to other people going through the experiences helps with coping with the uncertainty specifically, or is it a more general sense of?
I follow the Michael J. Fox mindset about the future. And so I very much live in the present. I try not to focus on the future because, as Michael J. Fox has been quoted as saying, it doesn't do you any good to worry about the future because then it may or may not happen that way. And then if it does, you're living it twice. And so why worry about it? So I'm very much interested in focusing on the here and now and not really worrying about what the future may or may not have in store.
Thank you.
A little background of me. This is not sort of my first caretaking job. And I discovered years ago that I really need to do Tai Chi like daily and go to class all the time and surround myself with people who do that kind of standing meditation. It keeps me calm and balanced, and it's also good for me. So I advocate for anybody who's a caretaker to make sure that you're doing something meditative, because otherwise you're not calm enough to be able to deal with whatever the next presentation is.
That makes sense. I'm hearing you all talk about some or approach some sort of routines and habits that in your daily life that might be helpful, and wondering if there anything more specific you might want to name that has been a really supportive routine for you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start. I've become a gym rat. I am at the gym. I'm at Rocksteady Boxing 3 days a week. I go to ACAC 3 days a week. Yesterday I just did Tai Chi. I do weightlifting. I do aerobic biking. I do Rocksteady Boxing. So my life has really become going to and from the gym. And we live up in Greene County, so it's about a half an hour drive each way. So major change of lifestyle for me is basically one of the things to manage that I can control is, one of the previous presenters mentioned, was exercise and vigorous exercise. And I've been embracing that. And so that's kind of defined what I've been doing.
So exercise, exercise, exercise. But I'm focusing on every day I wake up, I'm like trying to focus on my brain health. So it's not just like exercising, but just like what can I do today to make sure that I'm taking care of my brain? And I'm a big believer in the gut-brain connection. And so I'm equally interested in nutrition and what I'm putting in my body and doing things that are, and everybody's different. Okay, so I'm just gotta say, but for me, what works is making sure that I'm putting things in my body that are not not inflammatory. So for me, that means no alcohol. I try to limit my sugar intake and just be really thoughtful about my diet. And then water, just keep drinking as much water as I possibly can to stay hydrated. And then the stress response, making sure that I'm doing things that will keep my stress response down, keep that cortisol level down. So those, and it's a daily, it's a daily routine. It's a daily quest. Yeah.
I think also, which would be a pleasure, would be getting a bit more sleep every day.
Yeah, I hear that.
But it is a difficult thing as a caregiver to get enough sleep as a constant, because my experience with Parkinson's is that it has caused interesting dreams that are, things happen. There's a lot of thrashing and there can be singing in the middle of the night. French, French, but it's so that's a little interesting. And so it'd be nice to have that as a thing that I could say every day. Oh yeah, I got X amount of sleep overnight, which is a challenge.
Have you found any ways to try to make up that deficit that make you feel more rested? Sorry, that's probably
occasion.
Yeah.
When we were talking about vitamin D before, I was like, oh yeah, upon occasion when it's really nice out, I'll go sit and fall asleep in the sun for 20 minutes and like, uh-oh, I overdid it. Rare.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering about, this is maybe a little heavier question, so we can delay, but if you're trying to stay present, and that's a big part of coping, how do you balance that with doing some practical planning or having some meaningful conversations with your loved ones about the future to make sure either your finances are in order or your wishes will be managed as you want them to be? How do you balance those two things?
I think I failed in the last time I was asked this question publicly. So I'm just the kind of partner that's going to want to protect my spouse. So I'll take on more and more of that kind of role to make sure that our legal affairs are in good standing and that our financial affairs are in good standing. That's always been my role. So it's not like I'm shifting that burden off yet. And so I think that now's a good time for me to get my family more involved. I also am the mother of a 15-and-a-half-year-old son who's going to be turning, 16 altogether too soon. And so it's become more and more of a gentle family discussion about the situation without trying to scare him or, or my spouse. So that's my answer. I'm just slowly tiptoeing into that, but trying to, again, just keep everybody, this is what's happening right now. Yeah. Because I feel at peace with what I've done as it relates to our finances and our legal matters. Yeah.
Yeah, from our standpoint, it's a little bit different. We don't, my wife and I don't have any children, so there's a little bit different aspect of it. And we have the estate planning was set up quite a while ago, and it needs to be tuned up again. As far as, sort of as one physically deteriorates, we've had the discussion about establishing, I won't go into the details, but of establishing sort of what makes sense when, for what reason, for lack of a better phrase, and had that discussion. And that's going to be subject to change, but I've set up some fairly definitive lines of saying this is what I don't want to have happen to me, and I don't want to be a burden in this respect. And I won't go any further than that, but those discussions have taken place. And the good news is we haven't had to reinstigate those discussions at any time. So far, so good. So that's the good news.
Fortunately, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I guess, somebody presented us with what is recalled the red envelope, which basically makes you have to go through everything and write down like all your desires and your financial thing and who's going to get what and who's going to go where. And all of a sudden we got presented with like a different set of things, which may have sped up some of the ideas. There's still certain things that need to be discussed, but I think that it's about when it's appropriate, not like we need to talk about this at this moment. It's like, well, maybe something presents itself and then we could talk about it. I mean, I know that we've, Tom recently had a little bit of a heart scare and we needed to talk about that. So we did. I don't think it's healthy to sit down and dwell on it. I'm probably guilty of not dwelling on it at all.
You mentioned the red envelope. Are there other tools or resources, I should say, that you all have used to sort of guide any of those conversations or any of that thinking and planning that you've done on your own that you think might be helpful to share?
Back to those resources that Jim, you were starting to talk about, the Michael J. Fox Foundation is just a tremendous wealth of information as it relates to those types of topics. So those kinds of resources. And then Sarah's lined up a great educational opportunity for park members coming up where we have an estate planner coming in to talk about those issues. So I think that, the Parkinson's community understands that's an important topic, and I think we're getting some good discussion about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Have you had any trouble finding services or resources that felt really important in this up to now in your journey? Any major barriers or challenges that you would want to warn people about or share your workarounds?
I'll take the first stab at that. I mean, one of the reasons we're from the Charlottesville area, we moved here about 10 years ago. And one of the reasons why we moved here was, among other things, quality of medical care. And so we feel lucky to be able to have UVA here as well as Park and the other resources available to us, and organizations that are represented in the room today, to be able to be landing at the right place at the right time from that standpoint. So that's a major plus. I mean, I really feel for organization or for people living in more rural areas or other countries who don't have the ability to even get basic medical care, let alone specialized medical care. And so I feel, thankful for that. And so there's really no shortage of resources. It's a matter of sifting through the resources as much as anything. I alluded to before, being able to cut the noise from the signal from the noise and some of the things that you find online. That's important to be able to sift through that. But I can't really say there's any major resource in the Charlottesville area or Virginia area where we live and where we're all residing right now. That's a major deficiency that I can identify at this point in time for me.
And I'm sure that this is a national trend, but I'm not going to name names, but I had an appointment with my neurologist and he had to reschedule that. And so that made it to where the next appointment was going to be a year out, and it had already been 6 months. I'm just surprised, and maybe folks can talk about that, at how spread thin the medical community, the neurology department is relative to the rising number of Parkinson's. I saw recently that the number of Parkinson's cases is just going to go up exponentially given the aging boomer population, but the chemicals that were highlighted earlier in the earlier studies, I mean, that's just the reality. And as we're aging and all those folks are becoming clear that the chemicals had environmental impacts, did impact so many people, we're not staffed to handle that volume of Parkinson's patients there. I've said it, and it could be that I'm completely off base, but I'm concerned that there's just not enough medical depth, if you will, staffing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a given where we are right now, more than anything else. So, I know that in Canada, for example, that the wait for in British Columbia wait to see a neurologist can be 2 years. So, I mean, it's the city could always be worse, and sort of,
it's not just Charlottesville. It's a national.
It's a national, international thing. Yeah. So. That is one of the issues, is that there's only so many, not to get into the medical community looks where the money is, and the money is unfortunately probably not in neurology as opposed to orthopedics or something like that. And so that's where a lot of the resources are dedicated to. But I think, and I could be totally wrong here, but I think as more and more demand is created by more and more diagnoses, things might get better over time, but it might take 10, 20 years.
Martha, do you have anything to add?
From my point of view, from the caretaker point of view, I find that the most important thing I can do, no matter whether we're whatever the resource is, whatever the doctor is, whatever the conversation is, I'm there as the advocate. And the memory. That's what I'm there for.
Did you learn that on your own, or was that something that someone sort of tipped you off about early on?
I think this is just years of experience in taking care of people. It's something that's really important, and then you can go back and say, do you, like, if there's any questions, I'm the one that can follow up on the information. Because otherwise the patient gets a little overwhelmed.
Right. Are there specific ways that you, and not just you, Martha, but you too as well, as patients yourself, that you find advocating for yourself with your clinician team is particularly effective?
From the obvious baby boomer world, we I was brought up in a very rural place where I had a doctor who was the same person forever. And now it's, are we going here? Are we going there? Are we seeing this person? Are we seeing that person? I find that if you aren't very focused on what the question is, if you've got something to ask, that it's gonna get missed. You really have to be able to sort out all of the stuff, because then you just get sent in the wrong direction.
You make a really good point. Not just that, but your whole medical team, your general practitioners, knowing what your neurologist is saying, knowing what that's a challenge, I will say. Yeah.
In terms of,
That everybody understands what's going on.
right,
Collectively.
keeping everybody on the same
Yeah,
page.
right.
Mm-hmm. And you really have to be
An advocate.
the advocate,
Yeah,
right?
If I could just add, with medical care, the doctors in the room, I'm sure can attest to this. Your doctor, especially for a specialist like a neurologist, they have 20 minutes or something, allocated amount of time to see you as a patient. You, of course, live with this disease every single day. They see you once a year, maybe twice a year, something like that. So you've really got to focus what's on really, really important, what you want to get out of that meeting before you go into the meeting, and have the questions, and you've got to be able to focus on, what are the three major areas that I want to address? Because if you have 20 things or you're not well thought out, either one of those two situations, it's going to not be a satisfactory meeting for the practitioner or the patient.
I would agree. I think that the more prepared you are when you come in, at least to our clinic, and the more specific questions you have to ask, or the priorities that you come in with, so we can really focus our time and our energy problem solving around the things that are really making your life difficult or making your life challenging, the better, the more effective we can be with limited amounts of time, if that's what we're working with. I'm regret that you all have probably had long wait times, and I think you're right. It's not, no, I'm not defending us. I'm just saying it's a problem, and I certainly at UVA we're trying to get more capacity. It's movement disorders is a subspecialty of neurology. So you're usually, if you have Parkinson's, or hopefully you're not just seeing a neurologist, you're seeing a neurologist that specializes in movement disorder, which is more time. And in the past, the sort of public health community has been able to incentivize physicians to go into specific specialties that have higher demand with programs. But I think, it takes time to show the demand. So the more you're able to show it, either with your own provider in your health system, or, advocating in the bigger picture, the faster those solutions will happen. So I would always encourage you to advocate within the practice that you're in, or the health system that you're in, to say, hey, we can't deal with these wait times. This is too much, because that gives us more room to argue for more budget and more people on our end. So never hesitate to speak up on that. I'm just going to ask one more question. We have like 1 minute, so we'll do a lightning round. If you could give one piece of advice to your sort of day one diagnosed self, what would that be? Or your day one diagnosed care partner self?
I'm going to say that I guess day one is okay. We're going to just deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and whatever help and wherever it comes from, we will ask.
I think I would say you have a day to feel sorry about it, and then you've got to be positive and looking for the way of living with this diagnosis in the most positive, joyful way possible. Yeah.
As the third responded, I was going to say what they said. I saw the question come up, and I was really one of those difficult ones to answer for me personally. But because I don't really have any regrets from day one, so to speak, or what advice do I have from day one is to deal with it and move on, and move with it, and not necessarily fight it, but manage it. And this is something you have to manage emotionally and physically, and for both you and your care partner.
Well, I think we're wrap up. Are there any burning questions from the audience that you want to ask quickly while you have these guys up here? Yes.
The red envelope, well, I don't know whether that's it's something that happens in Vermont. I don't know whether it happens in Virginia, but it's like a whole plan of where you want everything, you know, the legitimate parts of it, the legal parts of it. And then it even goes through like where you want to be, how you want to be disposed of, and what you want surrounding that. I mean, it's the whole thing through the, you know, through the end. And
We can get you some
and I may be able to get a copy of it for you because it came from my church, but it's a Vermont thing.
We'll come and talk after so we can give you some ideas in Virginia. Anything else? Yes.
Induced Parkinson's. Your whole life changed, obviously, like I did. And when you were facing all of this, did you have access to a specific Parkinson's caregiver support?
Oh, well, we were completely introduced to Park, and that Sarah and the whole thing has been a huge help. It gave us the opportunity to go look at the exercise, then do the exercises. I just, for talking for somebody whose partner care doesn't like exercise, it was a huge life change.
Start looking out, there are others, as you know now, that are out there who need this. So we started one.
Oh.
Very helpful because you can share things within that group that you can't maybe share with other groups. So I was advocate for Parkinson's groups.
For those of you online who might not have heard that, person was advocating for finding a community of people that are experiencing what you're experiencing and being able to speak candidly and share your day-to-day with them and how much that means. Okay, we're gonna wrap. Thank you all so much. Thank you for sharing. We really appreciate it.
So the next presenter is actually going to be presenting via Zoom. She just finished clinic over at UVA. So just give us a few seconds to be able to get everything situated. She's going to be able to share her screen, and it's going to be up on here. Okay.
Hey, let me know if you guys can see that okay.
Yeah, we should be good. And I'm going to split. All right, I'm going to mute everybody else. All right, I think, Helen, you're the only one who is speaking other than me, okay?
Okay.
All right, so the next presenter is in Harvard. If you remember from last year, she had just gotten hired from UVA, from Rush University. Is that correct? Did I mute you by accident?
No, I muted myself because there was some echo. So
So she's, like I said, she just finished clinic, so she's going to be presenting on future treatments and the future of Parkinson's from her office at UVA. And as soon as she is finished, we will end the session and I'll come up before I let you guys go.
All right. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the history of the medications we use currently really quick, and then also move on to some of the new and up and coming treatments that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years. So hopefully we'll go on an interesting journey here together. So just to be clear, I have no relevant disclosures, and I am talking about some newer medications that are still brand name and that we'll be familiar with. So I wanted to specifically say that I have no relationships with any of the companies or brands that I'm mentioning. And just so you know, I'm not being paid to promote any of these things. I'm just here to give you some extra information, okay? All right, and so Parkinson's treatment goes way back into the 1970s, and even before that, with a lot of herbal treatments and other things that came out back in India and other medieval times with various herbal treatments. But the main things that we have been seeing have been in the past 50-ish years or so, and unfortunately, we've not made a lot of big movements forwards in the types of treatments that we use. So as you go way back, medications that were first used, some dopamine agonist-like medications, amantadine, which a lot of you might be on more for dyskinesia. And then our favorite medicine, carbidopa-levodopa, was officially approved for use in our Parkinson's patients back in 1975 and has remained kind of the mainstay of treatment for us over the years. And with that, we have had lots of different formulations of carbidopa that have kind of popped up, trying to make this medication a little bit easier to use, kind of manage some of those fluctuations and things that are going on. And so you can see after a long gap in 91, long-acting carbidopa-levodopa CR was approved, showing not a whole lot of benefit over the short-acting carbidopa-levodopa, kind of very variable time release, not the most effective medication, so we use it a lot at night and in combination with the short-acting. Scooting forward even more, Rytary was another long-acting that was approved many years later with the different capsules with time release. Still better than the short-acting and the CR, but still not the greatest. And inhaled levodopa for an as-needed medication was also introduced in 2018 to try and help boost the effectiveness of carbidopa-levodopa. We've done medications like entacapone and apicapone to try and help make that medication last longer. We've also tried to use other medications like dopamine agonists, so pramipexole and ropinirole specifically, being improved in 1997 to try and help boost that effectiveness and even try and put off starting people on carbidopa-levodopa. Combination medications like Stalevo, which combine entacapone with carbidopa-levodopa, have been put out there before. And other medications that are more adjunctive, like istradefylline and long-acting amantadine, have been approved. Apomorphine has been approved as needed, but really nothing that has so far eclipsed or replaced that basic carbidopa-levodopa that we go to so frequently. And so we're hoping with some of our future treatments, we can either improve the way we deliver this or kind of find better treatments to even target disease progression. So you might notice again with a lot of that, what is the big deal with levodopa? And so, like I said, a lot of these treatments kind of help boost the amount of dopamine in our brain. It's such a simple medicine. Levodopa is something we already have in our body, and we just don't have enough of it. So we give people that, it gets across the blood-brain barrier, unlike dopamine, and gets turned into dopamine, and it kind of replaces a lot of what's been lost there. And a lot of our other medications, like the dopa decarboxylase inhibitors, the MAO-B inhibitors, the COMT inhibitors, those sorts of things basically work to make more and more of that dopamine be present instead of the levodopa just breaking it down or being broken down too quickly. So that's kind of why it's been used. It's just such a simple mechanism, and it works really well for the most part, but delivery is oftentimes suboptimal, and the way the medication lasts is also suboptimal. Dyskinesia is also being a problem over time with the medication being too effective and then stopping working and not being as effective. So fluctuations to becoming a major issue. And that's kind of why we've been so focused in this area of treatment for so long. So we do have some things that work, but as you can imagine, and as you probably know from your personal experience, we have a lot of things that we still need to solve to make our treatment for Parkinson's better for our patients. So fluctuations in dyskinesia are a big thing, especially as disease progression goes on. Early on in disease, we do have a nice honeymoon period where we can have good response to carbidopa, levodopa, great symptom control, minimum side effects and issues. But over time, as disease progression continues, people become more sensitive to medicine. They become more liable to get dyskinesias, and the medicine doesn't last as long. So how can we make people's days smoother and prevent some of these things from happening? Is there anything else that we can use that doesn't have the same effect as the levodopa, where we get the fluctuations in dyskinesias? We tried replacing that with dopamine agonists, but we found, unfortunately, that over time, these can cause a lot of side effects with hallucinations, with sleepiness, with lightheadedness on standing. And then as patients get older, we frequently have to try and take them off these medicines because of those side effects. So it can be useful early on, but they're not a good medication for the long term as disease really starts to progress. And then even more helpful, as you guys have been told by your providers many times, there is no medicine that we currently have that actually slows down or changes progression of disease. It's all kind of like a Band-Aid to help make you feel better, which is great because it helps with symptom management, but it doesn't really do anything for the underlying progress. So with the exception, I would say, of exercise, which you probably have heard about. But can we make something that will actually slow down or stop the progression of disease? Are there any medications that we can use that can actually change the course for people? And so that is some of the stuff that's going to be coming down the pipeline in the years to come as well. So introducing you to some of our newest friends, the last year was really, really exciting for some treatments that were rolling out. And 2025, the Movement Disorders meeting had just a whole slew of things that were super cool that we had new. So these may be some of the things that you'll be encountering over time that are already approved. They're kind of new tools in our tool belt. So we have our newest long-acting medication friend, Crexont. And so this is like Rytary in that it has different components that are time release. So they have little beads, different layers that get rid of medication at different points in time. But the nice thing about this is there's an immediate release component, so you get treatment benefit right away. But the little beads also have a gel coating, so they stick to a part of your small intestine called the jejunum. And so then they sit there and they slowly release medication for a longer period of time to try and give smoother symptom control. We can convert roughly from carbidopa, levodopa to dosing in Crexont. These are some of the pill dose sizes here, with that being milligrams of levodopa available per capsule. We're still kind of refining exactly the best method for doing that, and there's usually some adjustment period, but the goal with this medicine is to reduce to 2, 3, or at most 4 times per day of dosing. So if you're taking it very, very frequently, this can help bring things down to less frequent dosage with better coverage. We also have some really exciting new devices that have come out, and these are really promising for helping with both fluctuations and dyskinesia. And so the first one we have here is called Vyalev, and it's a carbidopa levodopa pump that goes subcutaneously. It's kind of like an insulin pump for diabetes patients. And it's nice because we can directly convert from your oral carbidopa levodopa dose to what we think would be a good dose on the pump. And it makes some adjustments to give you the best overall coverage. It gives you 24/7 consistent coverage, which is nice. So you can actually keep it on all night long. A lot of people have symptoms that wake them up at night or feel really off in the morning, and this completely gets rid of that as a concern. And then it's actually pretty easy to handle and to manage, and it's much easier to program. So it's a nice medication delivery system. Similar effects to carbidopa, levodopa, but since you're not having so many ups and downs, a little bit less problematic in a lot of those areas. We also have a dopamine agonist pump. So this is subcutaneous apomorphine. Interestingly, has been approved in Europe for quite a while and has finally come through and been approved through the FDA here in the US. This is not meant to replace carbidopa levodopa necessarily, but can be an adjunct that gives smoother coverage during the day. And it's a medication that we use for 18 hours and you're off overnight for a couple of hours. You have to change up the infusion site and everything every day. And as any dopamine agonist, there may be hallucinations or impulsivity, but it's much less of an issue than your oral medications and can help smooth out some of that coverage as well. And then this year, actually, at this year's conference in the AAN, they introduced a brand new dopamine agonist, which is a completely different mechanism from our previous dopamine agonists. So this one targets D1 receptors, which is really more targeted on your motor symptoms. And unlike older medicines, which can target two different kinds, the D2 and D3 receptors, which may cause more of the mental health side effects and the impulsivity, this is a completely different target, and we're hopeful that this is going to give us more motor benefit without causing as many of those side effects. And it's the first medication of its kind. So this is a brand new thing that's just rolling down the pipeline, hasn't actually been released yet. And they're calling it Juvmo, the brand name, and the generic name is tavapadon. So we should be seeing more of that coming up within the next months to year. And then finally, deep brain stimulation is a surgical intervention that we use for our Parkinson's disease patients. And ordinarily, after you've been implanted, you get programmed. The program kind of stays the same from hour to hour, day to day. It doesn't have any ability to respond to changes in the brain, changes that come along with medication dosage. So it is sitting at a constant state. But Parkinson's is a fluctuating disease. Even without medications, people have days or times that are better than others. So this is a new development that Medtronic has brought up for our DBS patients, and it allows the leads to actually read the local brain activity, like a teeny tiny EEG, and use that to make real-time adjustments to the DBS settings. And so that kind of allows that DBS stimulation to fluctuate in tandem with the fluctuations that we're seeing with our Parkinson's disease patients. So, and we're setting that up. We're just starting to do more programming with that in our clinic. So that is something new and cool that we've been able to roll out. So when patients do get DBS, especially with, it's only available with the Medtronic, but it is another useful tool that we're being able to utilize. All right, and so that was kind of a whirlwind introduction to just the things that you may be hearing about in clinic currently, of things that we have available to us. But there are a lot of things that we're currently working on in the research sphere that are new and different treatments. So one of the interventions that we can use is called focused ultrasound, and we've been doing this for a while now for essential tremor, had good benefit with our patients. And the way this works is that we use an MRI machine to define a very specific target deep in the brain and use sound waves to kind of burn a tiny hole or give you a teeny tiny stroke in a very targeted area. And with essential tremor, we target a deep part of the brain called the thalamus in a very specific spot. And when you lesion that area with the sound waves and burn that little hole, it reduces tremor on the opposite side of the body. And we've actually gotten it to work now where we can go in a few months later and do the other side of the brain to get tremor control in both hands. However, we're working on finding better areas to use that'll be more specific for our Parkinson's patients, because tremor is a big problem in Parkinson's disease, but it's not the only symptom that people have or that people are dealing with. And so we've been looking at different areas to control more of the movement-related symptoms. So the subthalamic nucleus, which is another gray matter nucleus deeper in the brain, and it's also a target for deep brain stimulation. Or looking at a specific white matter tract that connects the thalamus to the globus pallidus. And targeting an area like that can help reduce more of the motor-related symptoms with Parkinson's disease. And we're talking more like tremor, bradykinesia, rigidity. One of the problematic side effects, though, with all of these is that gait instability is potentially an issue. In most patients, this is more of a problem early on after treatment and improves over time. So a lot of people in our essential tremor patients especially will get their gait back to normal within the first month or so, and it's pretty good. But after a year, whatever kind of imbalance we have, we're kind of stuck with. So that's something that we have to be really mindful when we're treating people with these kinds of interventions if we're already having some major walking problems. But compared to DBS, it's non-invasive and it could be a potential helpful treatment, especially for people in the future who are not good surgical candidates. So something else to be thinking about. Infusion therapy. So you guys may have heard about in Alzheimer's disease, some of the new infusion therapies we have that target the accumulation of amyloid and can help reduce disease, not necessarily reverse it, but slow down disease progression. So in the same vein, prasinezumab is an antibody therapy, and it specifically targets alpha-synuclein, which is the misfolded protein in Parkinson's disease patients. And unlike the amyloid-based therapies, the antibody sticks to the alpha-synuclein, and it specifically helps stop it from spreading to nearby cells, which by itself slows down the disease process. We think that when patients have misfolded alpha-synuclein, it spreads from neuron to neuron in kind of like a misfolded protein called a prion. And that's how the aggregates get spread out through the brain. So if we can keep it from moving from one cell to another, then we can potentially slow down that process. And because it's not initiating an immune response, so far we haven't seen in the studies that have been done inflammatory changes in the brain or bleeding in the brain, which we've seen in some other kind of antibody-related studies. So that has not been as much of an issue, and it actually has been potentially considered to be anti-inflammatory, depending on what studies you're looking at. So it's been moving on. There were promising phase 2 trials, and now they're moving on to some larger phase 3 clinical trials to investigate the utility of this in more depth. So GLP-1s seem to be everywhere. I'm sure everyone's heard about this in the context of diabetes, in the context of weight loss especially. So that's where they're mostly used. But studies previously have suggested that they may be an inflammation reduction agent that could slow down the progression of Parkinson's disease. There haven't been robust findings so far on studies to suggest that we should be putting everybody on GLP-1 therapies. But there has been some statistically significant differences, specifically in cognitive changes and in motor symptoms in patients who are treated with these medications compared to controls. And we don't really know, based on the studies that have been done so far, if they just improve the symptoms or if we're actually seeing a disease modification effect. So that's still unclear at this point in time. And as you can see over here, some of the proposed mechanisms, aside from the neuroinflammation kind of cooling down that irritation that can drive degeneration. So oxidative stress or mitochondrial problems, which we think are involved in the development of Parkinson's disease, that may be able to slow down or stop that. So regulating impaired breakdown of abnormal proteins in cells, kind of maybe upregulating that and clearing that misfolded alpha-synuclein more easily. And then slowing down the depletion of dopamine. So those are some of the things that they think may be happening with these medicines, but there's still a lot of work that we're doing. And at this point, we're still not globally recommending that anybody start these, but potentially in the future, we'll have more information. And one of the things you do have to be careful about, constipation is already a major problem with our Parkinson's disease patients, and side effects like constipation can be a major issue with GLP-1 therapies as well. So even if we do start using these, we're going to need to be very careful about monitoring things like that and not making that worse. So one of the really interesting areas that we hear a lot about is stem cell treatments. And it's interesting because there is actually a pretty long history of investigation of stem cells for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And this goes also back to the 70s and 80s, where the logic was these cells are dying off, we're losing the cells that make dopamine, and we have cells that we can put in. Can we just put new cells in, and will that help people get better? So this initially was studied in fetal stem cells from an area of the brain called the ventral mesencephalon, which is an early part of the brainstem. And they took these cells basically and put them in the substantia nigra of Parkinson's disease patients. And they actually did show some recovery in dopamine transmission and some recovery in the patient's symptoms. But unfortunately, when we go back and look post-mortem, that alpha-synuclein, its pesky way of traveling from cell to cell, didn't spare the graft tissue. So the cells that they put in there eventually wound up populated with alpha-synuclein anyway. And even in people who did have some benefit, it wasn't a robust response across studies. There was oftentimes poor survival of the graft, and actually re-innervating, like getting that neuron to go where it needs to go in another part of the brain, is really tricky. So we kind of put it to the side for a little while after that because of those issues. There's another kind of stem cell from connective tissue called mesenchymal stem cells. They don't necessarily make more dopamine or remake the lost tracks from the substantia nigra to the basal ganglia, but they may have protective properties, reduce local inflammation. So there's a thought process that kind of calming down that inflammation in another way could be helpful. And also that pesky, again, misfolded alpha-synuclein, which is building up and leading to cell death, may be further broken down, further decreased by these kinds of cells. So the thought process was we could target it not by giving people more dopamine-making cells, but by giving people cells that modulate the factors that cause disease progression. And then lastly, induced pluripotent stem cells. They can be actually derived from the patient themselves and made into stem cells, or they are cells, just regular cells that can be reduced back into stem cells. And they're a lot easier to turn into a specific kind of cell. So whereas stem cells, they can turn into pretty much anything. Some of these other stem cells, it's kind of hard to tell, what they'll differentiate into. These you can actually differentiate ahead of time into the kind of cells that you want. And so there are fewer safety concerns, there are fewer ethical concerns because they're not necessarily fetal-derived stem cells. So we've done a lot of work on this in primates, and this has been potentially safe and effective, but especially if you're talking about taking someone's own cells and then reverting them to stem cells and then turning them into the kind of cells that you need, this is a lot of work, it's expensive, and like a lot of these other cell groups, you can still have invasion of alpha-synuclein with time. It doesn't necessarily mean that's not going to happen. And there's work going on to try and develop standardized cell lines that you could actually buy, like you would buy medicine from a pharmacy, to get around some of the time and cost concerns. And we do that for research. We have cell banks where people can buy propagated cells, and this would be more like doing a cell bank, but also for treatment instead of just for research. So one of the trials that we're revisiting currently is a new cell line called bemdaneprocel. And so this is a specific line derived from human embryonic stem cells, and these were just specifically taken from embryos that were for in vitro fertilization, but were ultimately not used. And families did consent to their donation for this trial, just to be clear on all of those things. And they did have good phase 1 results, so it's actually being fast-tracked into phase 3 to see if we can get some more benefit. So far, they've not had any major adverse events. They've had good survival of the graft, improvement in motor symptoms, and no dyskinesia was brought on by these sorts of things. So the goal is, again, to source the cells, create a bank, distribute them for surgery, and then put them in the putamen where they can regenerate and help produce more of the dopamine that we need. So far, some promising results, looking to do a larger study to get some more information. And there is a lot that we talk about or that people see. There are various companies or groups, especially in other countries, that are offering stem cell treatment right now. I just wanted to be clear about that. Currently, we don't have evidence that the benefit outweighs the risk of undifferentiated stem cells. So until we have a specific cell line or more specific evidence, I would avoid doing these things. As you can imagine, when you have a cell that could turn into kind of anything, if it's not regulated and it's not done in a proper, with a proper protocol, there is an increased risk of tumor. So these undifferentiated lines have been known to differentiate into tumors like teratomas. So that is something that we need to be really, really careful of. And, you know, when we talk about other alternative treatments, this is one thing that I do advise people to avoid as far as those treatments go. Not that it's not a valid thing that we're studying, but nothing is available right now that I would recommend to anybody. So as you guys may know too, there are certain genes that can cause Parkinson's disease, and we're actually developing more targeted treatments based on some of those gene mutations. Pardon me. Two of the major genes are glucocerebrosidase and LRRK2. So these medications that are in here are all developed specifically for some of those. And then SINCA alpha-synuclein gene mutations are a target as well that we've been working on. So some of the specific medicines that have been currently studied are Ambroxol, which is interestingly actually a cough suppressant ordinarily, or a mucolytic agent. But it's been found to actually increase the activity of proteins that help break down various misfolded proteins that shouldn't be there, essentially. So specifically for patients with mutations in the GBA gene, this has been found to be potentially a helpful mechanism. And again, the goal is to help make sure that we're breaking down misfolded proteins like alpha-synuclein like we should be. Venglustat is another medication that specifically works on glycosphingolipids, and this is more getting towards patients who have Gaucher-like disease, which comes along with GBA mutations, not necessarily just with GBA and Parkinsonism, but it can help reduce those the abnormal accumulation of certain glycosphingolipids, which can cause problems with the breakdown of other proteins, problems with some of those other systems that can lead to misfolding and accumulation of alpha-synuclein. So that's also being studied. There's some more specific genetic treatments. So antisense oligonucleotides go into the genes and block the production of mRNA. So that means that less of that bad protein that we don't want around is made. And that's specifically a treatment for LRRK2 that we're looking at now. There are also some oral medications that reduce the production of LRRK2 as well. And then antisense oligonucleotides, silencing RNAs, and even CRISPR, which is a gene modification tool, a gene editing tool, are being studied looking at the alpha-synuclein gene as well. So lots of things that are coming out there. Nothing that is specifically coming to the market right now, but things that you should be looking for in the future, especially if you know you or your family member has mutations in any of these genes. And the most important thing that I really want to drive home to you guys today, and this is kind of small print, but I wanted you guys to be able to just take a picture of it really easily on your phone, are the studies that we're doing here at UVA that you have potential to get involved in. And some of those ones are similar to the things that I've already mentioned. So first of all is new LRRK. And so this is looking at a LRRK2 mutation modifier. And so that's that new 411 that was up on that last slide. It's an oral medicine, and it blocks the activity of the LRRK2 gene. And we're doing this over a 1-year treatment period. Subjects are randomized to drug or placebo. You don't have to know if you have the mutation or not before asking about the study. Part of the study is genetic testing for mutations, not just in LRRK2, but also in the genes surrounding LRRK2, or that modulate LRRK2 that may also drive disease. So it is worth looking into potentially. However, you should have a confirmed Parkinson's disease diagnosis. Unfortunately, you should not be on medication and not be expected to need a medication for your Parkinson's symptoms for at least a year while the study is ongoing. So those are kind of the big caveats as far as new LRRK goes. The next one is a study called Pariso, and that is actually looking at the prasinezumab that I mentioned early on in this presentation. So that's the phase 3 study that's looking at changes in disease progression over 2 years with regular infusion treatment with prasinezumab. And so it's a drug versus placebo randomization. After the 2 years, if there is good benefit, then you may be eligible to join in with a 2-year extension where all of the subjects will get study drug. So it's monthly infusions and clinical evaluations for 2 years, kind of following along, making sure we're not having any side effects, watching your motor improvement, watching cognitive changes. So they're lengthy visits. And then inclusion criteria, you may be between 50 and 85 years old. You should have had a diagnosis of Parkinson's for at least 3 months, but not more than 3 years. So this is especially good for people who are early on. So Hoehn and Yahr stage 1 or 2, which essentially means you have shaking, slowness, stiffness, but your walking is okay. So you can have a lot of the other symptoms, but you shouldn't be having walking problems or falling. And you can be on carbidopa, levodopa for this particular trial, at least 3 months at a stable dose, and not expected to change the dose significantly over the course of the trial. No other medications are allowed with entry into this trial, however. So something else to think about. The next one here is the ANOVIS trial. So it's also a phase 3 study. It's looking at a small molecule called bintanitab that looks to slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. It generally slows down the production of toxic proteins. Alpha-synuclein is one of those. It also includes proteins like amyloid and tau. And the goal is to reduce local inflammation and improve the integrity of the neurons that are being broken down in the degenerative disease process. Patients who participate in this study are randomized to 10, 20 milligram or placebo groups. The study is a 6-month-long study, 5 site visits and 9 calls for monitoring over the time that you're on the study. For this one, you must have Parkinson's disease, Hoehn and Yahr 1 through 3, so you may have some walking problems, but not severe walking problems. And that is when you're maximally treated with medication. You should not have more than 2 hours of off time during the day. Age should be between 40 and 85. Relatively good cognitive status with MMSE 20 to 30, and you should be independent with your care. And you may continue on standard of care Parkinson's medications and mood medications, no restrictions as to what those imply. And then the last treatment study we have is with Biohaven. It's a combined phase 2 and 3 study looking at a specific drug that blocks tyrosine kinase 2 and JAK1, which are pro-inflammatory proteins. The goal is to reduce inflammation that is related to neurodegeneration. So that's more globally anti-inflammatory treatment. Similar to the ANOVIS study, you're randomized to 10, 20, or placebo, and it's a 48-week long study, so a little bit less than a year. Must have diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and diagnosed within the past 2 years. You cannot be a smoker, and you cannot be treated on other medications for Parkinson's disease. So this is limited to drug-naive patients. We also have some observational studies that are helpful to take part in because it helps us understand better our patients' experience with their disease and how things change over time. So we have one that's funded through a group at Bayer, and we have our own PD database here that we're working on building. So multiple things that you can get involved in that are not treatment related if you're interested in just being involved in research in general and interested in being on our radar. So next question is like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on. I think I might be good for some of these things. I'm interested in hearing more. What do I do to get more information? So you can reach out to whoever's taking care of you. I'm happy to answer any questions if you're seeing me. If you're seeing any of your other providers, you can reach out to them. Or during your visits, ask us what things we have going on. We have a lot of options. Alternatively, we have information here for our research coordinators. They're phenomenal. They're really good at touching base with people and taking a look at your charts, talking with us, figuring out if you fit well into any of these study protocols. So once we get on their radar, they'll review your chart, they'll take a look at any contraindications, they'll discuss with us to see if everybody agrees that you would be a good fit. And if we feel like you would be a good participant for one of these trials, they would reach out to get you consented and to get started. So definitely a lot of options that are out there if you're looking to get into any more of these things early on. If not, those are just some ideas and some things that we have coming down the pipeline, hopefully in the next several years, that are going to be options for treatment for Parkinson's disease. So just for your information. All right. Thank you so much for letting me talk and ramble for so long for you guys. I'm going to unmute this here. Any questions?
Anybody have questions in person? Dana, are there any questions on Zoom? No. Yes, we do. Hold on 1 second.
Bit of a silly question, but I'm just interested. Is there any research on the effect of, or if there is any effect on cannabinoids, THC, and Parkinson's?
Yeah, so with THC specifically, I've not seen any newer studies recently, but I would have to actually go back and take another look to actually update you. But I have not really seen anything that's shown good benefit with that. And I also careful with sedation, with falls, with hallucination risk in a lot of my patients. So until I get more information about that, I'm kind of wary about it.
Going once, going twice. You're the new owner. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. We appreciate you so much for taking time out of your day. I know that you were at clinic this morning, probably have more clinic appointments afterwards. So let's give Dr. Holland a round of applause. If you want
Thank you very
you
much.
can stop sharing your screen if you.
Yes, I will stop sharing.
Okay. All right. So I will start sharing my screen. Oh, maybe not. Okay. We're going to skip everything that she just went through.
Yeah.
Over to the end. So you have the surveys, feel free to fill them out. There are red baskets where you checked in for registration. So just drop those in.